My name's Nicky Arscott. I'm an artist and a poet. I live in Llanbrynmire in mid Wales. And as part of the Poetry Connections IndiaWales project, I was partnered up with a poet called Subhro Bandopadhyay, who lives in Delhi but is originally from Calcutta. One of the first things Subhro said to me when I first met him, when he came over to stay in Aberystwyth, was that the British had only brought three good things to India during their rule, and that was tea, cricket, and PG Wodehouse. Thus began from Subhro the most gentle and humorous of onslaughts that is still ongoing, and which I will pick up on again later. First of all, though, I want to talk about a cemetery. It's the Arnos Vale Cemetery in Bristol, to be precise, and it was the destination of our first road trip together when we decided to go to Bristol. Now, I know that Bristol is not Wales, it is in fact in England, but it seemed like a good place to go once the discussion of colonialism became so prominent in our conversations. It's where I went to university, where I in fact took a module in post-colonial literature. Subhro wanted to visit the grave of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who is the father of the great Bengali Renaissance and who was a social reformer. The grave was impressive. It looked like a mini temple in the grass. Next to it grew delicious-looking blackberries, and I encouraged Subhro to try one of the blackberries, and he said, "Ah, you British, you always consume everything." So I'm going to start with my first poem, which is inspired by this trip to Bristol. This is from our book, Aerial Routes. Preliminary poem. Once I lived in an ancient world with a crimson ball that hung above the harbour, and the centre of the world sat framed on tenured desks, and the only monks on fire was a drunk man in a privet hedge. To dress as a pirate in the Commonwealth Museum was of no consequence, or to lounge in the road for the children of Iraq was of no consequence. Strange the mind devoid of both bird and flying insect. And the great boat slid heavily from its harbour, like a stomach lacking the ability to perform the process of digestion. O suspension over muddy entrails. O everlasting partition. How my whalebone skirt has saved me like a parachute. The idea of being in the centre of a huge skirt came from a story that my dad told me when I was small about a woman who was thrown off the Clifton Suspension Bridge and who was quite literally saved by her huge billowing skirt. And this idea of being right in the centre of something, be that a skirt or a parachute or a poem or an empire, became something that I wanted to play around with in the poems that I wrote. I like the idea of independence as a recentering, and what it means for a country such as India, whose supposed centre was for so many years Britain. As part of my residency in India, I stayed in Delhi, quite near to where Subhro and his wife live. I saw the Taj Mahal, I travelled around the city, and I was always thankful to have Subhro as my guide, with his deep knowledge and our shared sense of humour, which is quite dark, which got us through the strange scenario of being thrust into each other's worlds, very different worlds. But on to the second cemetery. This one was the South Park Street Christian Cemetery in Kolkata, which Subhro took me to visit during our book tour. There were teenagers prowling amongst the gravestones. There were dogs, there were things falling down, and the graves showed the names of men and women and children who died. I imagine a lot of them from malaria during the British colonial rule. And I felt very sad. I think I was very much missing home that day, and I felt very, very sad. But it also felt right that this place was not revered. It was not at the centre of things. East India Company. Is this what it is to move elegantly through the world? Fat horse with its ankles swollen in a field of mud. Thin horse twists its felted neck and bucks in the dust. I move around the room like a captain. I salute the friendly fan above my bed. Each morning, woman crouches wide to sweep the floor with a horse's tail. She considers deleting the earlier poetry. Each morning I rinse out my smalls to hang above the sink, peel a persimmon and a packet of Emirates crackers. I wash the knife in the stainless steel sink. I wait like a captain at the desk. Later we will have a discourse on colonialism. It is very simple. The wet horse lifts its tail, emits a gas. The woman sweeps an arc around herself. I've had a few interesting conversations back home about the Indian attitude towards the British now. Are they grateful? Aren't they still quite fond of us? And when this happens, I recall some of the conversations I had with Subhro on his balcony in Delhi, with the bees attracted to the fluorescent light. We talked about Churchill's role in the Bengal famine of 1943 that killed between 2 and 3 million people. We talked about partition and its effects, its long-lasting effects. We talked about climate change and who is going to be affected. Who will it affect the most? And we talked about plastic and Spanish wines and McDonald's and the trees that smelled of citrus where we sat. I recall the time I Skyped Subhro and his wife in Delhi, and it was so polluted and so hot, and his air conditioning had packed in, and he was almost crying, although he could also have been laughing. I'm very grateful to have made a good friend in Subhro, to have been immersed in his India, and to have had my work translated into Bangla. So this poem is for him. Temple. Tennis ball hit me on the head, and all the faculties did collapse. Boys playing cricket in a side street. Bat boy angled to crack like a backwards cricket. Heads angled to see whether to laugh or not. Suddenly the whole of a tiny empire, depending on the face not crumbling, tennis ball matted in the palm, bad offering rolled to a stop in the blurred dirt. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Boys in the temple, boys climbing the walls, boys playing cricket in the temple, naughty boys with arms and legs too long for them. Goofy boys with teeth flinging cow dung at the clean temple, running back to mothers through the neem trees, feather trees, the pale dust. Was it better back then? I see your raised hand, bespectacled. You sit behind a classroom desk. Captain-like. Boys, it was a mere tap.